Hi, you're here with Kasim Abdur Razzaq, author, psychotherapist, and CEO of Abdur Razzaq Counseling and Social Architecture. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to share with you a book that I wrote in 2018 called The 5 Essential Principles for Healing Black Men and Raising Black Boys. Before I talk about the book, I want to give just a little bit of background about who I am, how I came to be in the profession of psychotherapy, what I find exciting about it, and eventually talk about what inspired me to write this book. So my background is I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, what used to be known as the historic Rondo neighborhood, which was a predominantly African American neighborhood that had a strong economic corridor at a certain point in time that most people most commonly known for being disrupted by Highway 94 and dispersing that black community. And so I was a child who was born in the last parts of that legacy of the historic Rondo neighborhood. And so I'm very much a product of those individuals, those institutions, organizations, and families who lived in the Rondo neighborhood, played in the Rondo neighborhood, and invested their time. So one of the things I'll say is growing up in a family of 6 and being the middle child, third child of 6, is that I always had a lot of company. Always had a lot of brothers and sisters around, people at my house. But what shaped me in terms of values, in terms of understanding my personal identity, in its relationship to family and community, was that neighborhood of Rondo. So how I got to kind of where I'm at today, which is being the owner of a mental health practice located here in St. Paul, and being a person who trains, does speaking engagements, consults, and delivers mental health therapy, individual, couples, and families. The way I got to that space is actually pretty untraditional in some ways, and in some ways also unexpected. I was a college student who went off to play basketball at Missouri S&T, and I found myself choosing psychology as a major. And upon graduating from there and coming back to Minnesota, I immediately started to work in the social service profession. And there were some things that were pretty natural to me because of the experiences that I had as a child, which was being mentored by older adults, having adults listen to my story, having adults encourage me and uplift me. And so my role, or the job that I had coming back from college, was essentially that. It was a job as what they called a skills worker. And I worked in that field for a very short time, just 3 months. And one of the supervisors there took interest in me and asked what was my future goals. And I said I wanted to become a licensed psychologist. And we had some conversation. They gave me some advice on kind of my career path. And so what I ended up doing was I actually didn't go into my doctorate program as a clinical psychologist. I went into a program for social work. So I went into a master's program for clinical social work at the University of St. Thomas. And it was a great experience. One of few men that were in the program, and even fewer people who were African American that was in that program. And so right away that program was a benefit to me because, number one, it allowed me to explore and express parts of my cultural identity that was actually not shared in the classroom. And so that was an exciting thing for me to be able to talk about my cultural upbringings, my cultural norms, social identities that shaped how I interact and how I think about things. And upon graduation from that program, I immediately joined back into the community, working within the school systems. So I had an opportunity to work as a special education, social worker, and other facets, youth engagement, and then finally being where I'm at today, which is completing my last year of a counseling psychology doctoral program, so full circle. And in between those two times of the master's program and the counseling psychology doctoral program that I'm in currently, I started a private practice, and the private practice is Abdur Razzaq Counseling and Social Architecture. And again, the focus there is that we consult with organizations around best practices to create wellness, particularly for African Americans and less specifically people of color, and even less specifically marginalized populations. So that has been my journey. My journey has been that process since 2009 is when I finished graduate school for clinical social work, and in 2015 is when I opened the doors of Abdur Razzaq Counseling and Social Architecture. So between 2015 2018, I started positioning myself to write this book. And as it would have it, in 2017 is actually when I started writing the book, in the fall. So fall of 2017, I had been working 2 years in my practice, and I started to hear lots of pattern from the clients and the people that I was serving from the community, and I needed a space to be able to kind of process it in a more of an intellectual way. And so I started to write. And the way that I wrote this particular book is I wrote it in the way that I've received information culturally, and I wrote it as a story. As a kid growing up, story time was a big part of just what it was to be a kid. Your parents told you stories, grandparents would sit all the grandkids down and tell stories, and those stories had, values, principles, and morals embedded within them. And so there was one story that was shared with multiple people, and the collective group was supposed to extract what they needed from the story in terms of their individual experiences in life. And so I started writing this book with the hope of shedding light on, number one, what it was like for me as an African American boy to grow up holding that identity, what it was like to be within a family system holding that identity, and what it was like to be someone within the community holding that identity, and the challenges, the pitfalls, the hurts, the pains, as well as the positives and the opportunities for healing and wellness. And so today there's a particular excerpt in here that I want to share with you, and the excerpt is something about what it means to hold the social identity of Blackness. We talk about, that race is a social construction, and at the same time, Blackness is a political designation. And so as a mental health professional, one of the things that I learned in my interaction with the community, and that the community has taught me, is that mental health can be a very powerful intervention for the individual. However, political health is something that is extremely important to the wellness of Black people, and political wellness falls within the realm and touches on the components of culture. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from the book that speaks to, number one, what does Black culture sound like, look like, how do we identify it, how do we digest it and make it something that is valuable and accessible to us. And then two, what is culture supposed to do? Culture is supposed to have an effect. And so I give some terminology around this. I'll share this excerpt. One of the most detrimental practices of the Black community has been the failure to accept and teach a political definition of culture by which we can live, unite, and become free. For Black people to know their culture, we must have a politically effective definition for it. We must have a definition that helps us to focus our attention on concepts that facilitate sovereignty and complete personhood for every Black life. If Black people intend to be healthy and free, we have to understand and operate under the definition that our beloved mother and elder, Dr. Marimba Ani, gave us, which is, culture is our immune system. How befitting and astute her analogy becomes when we contemplate the physical genocide carried out on our Black bodies through death-producing gut health practices. Black people all across the nation have adopted eating and drinking, meaning being the highest consumer of sugary drinks, habits that are destroying our black vessels. I remember talking to a college friend of mine, Dr. Jason Scott Holly, who informed me that 90% of health conditions impacting the black community are directly related to our diet. There are likely many positions and responses to the quandary of the black diet and why we destroy our bodies through our food choices. However, the why and solution is just that. Our diet is a function of choice, and choice is a function of cognition, attitudes, beliefs, and values. Therefore, addressing the physical condition of the black community is still a matter of taking hold of the black mind. As you see, there is an interconnectedness between the sickness that has pervaded the mind, body, and spirit of black people. In order to regain the balance of this trilateral union, it is vital that we become culturally activated. The African body is under constant emotional, psychological, chemical, and physical attack. Let us understand that our culture is responsible for protecting our African bodies, not the police, not schools, hospitals, or any other institutional entity that has an investment in seeing us dead. I'm talking about social death, emotional death, psychological death, and physical death. Because many of us are so far removed from the political action embedded within our culture, we are nothing more than the walking dead, departed from our culture, thus removed from living. Man, when I listened to that, and again, this is in 2018, I think about what inspired those words around culture being connected to the physical life of black people. And here we are in 2021, just a year after experiencing a lot of community trauma with the physical death of a lot of black bodies via all of the things that have happened here in Minnesota over the past few years in terms of community trauma. And it makes me affirmed on the fact that, again, even 2 years prior, there were some things that the community had shared even 3 years before I wrote this that were telling of the experiences that black people have on a daily basis, and the need for a cultural paradigm that not only assures that we understand ethnic traditions, but that we have a culture that protects our physical life, our spiritual life, and our emotional life. And that it is imperative that for us as black people that we become the responsible party for protecting those things, which means we have to have a culture that is affirmed, collective, and united in making sure that our physical life, our emotional life, and our spiritual life is intact and preserved. And again, it speaks to that it's not the responsibility of any other institution or organization aside from black people, which means our institutions. And the first institution would be the black family, that the black family is responsible for teaching and embedding culture into the children. And then after the black family, that the black community is also responsible for nurturing and embedding black culture into black families. And that even moving out further from there, that black organizations. So again, my organization is responsible for transmitting and embedding culture into the lives of families, communities, and individuals, assuring that what is transmitted helps to produce life, longevity, social, emotional protection, and spiritual protection. And so I appreciate you sitting here and allowing me to share this passage about my book, The 5 Essential Principles for Healing Black Men and Raising Black Boys. I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.